Welcome back. In this video, we're going to work on changing the button here so that it displays when it's currently rolling, and also it is disabled so you can't click it again while it's currently rolling. And then we'll add in the animation as well. So let's begin. The first thing we'll need to do is figure out how we're going to keep track of whether it's rolling or not. We're going to need a variable, a piece of information that says we're currently rolling or we're currently not rolling, just a Boolean true or false. And what makes the most sense for that, state or props? Obviously it's going to be state because it's going to change. We're going to flip it back and forth between true and false, depending on if it's currently rolling or not. So let's come over here, and inside of our roll dice component, we're leaving the die alone for now. The button is only in the roll dice component. What we're going to do is inside of our this.state declaration, we're going to add a new property. Just call it isRolling or rolling with two L's. And at the beginning, it should be false. We need to give it an initial value. Then down here, once we roll, when we're setting the state, we're picking these two numbers or the two values for the new faces. We update them. Let's also say that rolling is now true. That's simple enough. So right now we click it once, it's true and it stays true. So we'll fix that in a little bit. But if we come down to our button, we now can change the text here. So instead of roll dice, I'm going to go to a new line and do our ternary operator and check depending on this .state .rolling. So if it is rolling, what do we want to display in the button? Let's say rolling. Otherwise, if it's not rolling, we'll say roll dice. And that should be enough for us to see something. So if we come over here, it says roll dice. When I click it, it now says rolling, but it permanently says rolling. And every time I click, it still works up here to change the faces of the die or the dice, but this is never going back. So what we're going to do is use a timer. So when I refresh the page, I click. After 1 second, I want to change it so that it goes back to what it was before, roll dice. So we can use set timeout to help us do that. So we set rolling to true right here inside of roll. And then after 1 second, let's just say, wait 1 second, then set rolling to false, which will then reset this down here so that it displays roll dice because of this bit of logic. So to do that, we can use set timeout, just like this. And we'll use our arrow function. And then inside of it, this.set state, and we'll simply update rolling to be false again. And how long do we want that to take? We're going to do it after 1 second, so 1000 milliseconds. And I'll save. Let's give it a shot. So it starts out as rolling is false. I click it, it goes to true, and then it came back to false, and we see roll dice again. Okay, so that's working, but I still can click repeatedly in the middle. I don't know if you can see that, but let me wait for it to reset. As I click it once, I can click again and still change those values while it still says rolling. So I want to disable the button during that process for that 1 second. And that's surprisingly easy because we already are keeping track of whether it's rolling or not in our state. So I can use that in conjunction with something we haven't seen, which is why this was a bit of a bonus. There's an attribute we can add called disabled. And we pass in our case, just a Boolean value. So this.state.rolling. So this button, like if I just give it true, for example, like that, come over here, this button is permanently disabled. I can't click it. It doesn't do anything. So instead of that, we're going to only have it be disabled, have this set to be true when this.state.rolling is true. And that only happens for a second at a time. So now try it again. I'm going to click, and if I try to keep clicking, it doesn't work. I don't know if you can hear me, but trust me, I'm clicking like 10 times a second over here, trying to fool it. It doesn't work. It's disabled during that 1 second. Okay, so there's that. Now let's tackle the piece that has to do with the animation. So if we go back to the initial document here, you can see that when I click, this animation is triggered that causes the dice to jiggle or shake, whatever you want to call it. So this isn't a course on animations. I've just found a jiggle animation online using CSS keyframes. So I'm going to show it to you over here. I have it commented out in my die.css. If you're not familiar with keyframes, Well, here's a 2-second crash course. We declare at keyframes and then we give it a name. This is up to us. Wobble makes sense. And we define a set of steps along the way, how we want our animation to work. And then later, we're going to tell it how long it should take. So right now, just defining this doesn't do anything. It's defined in here, but it's not assigned to any of our pieces. No CSS code is actually using wobble. We've just put it here. It's a thing, but it's not in action. So I'm using translate, which is going to allow us to move something back and forth. If you look at what actually happens here, they are moving left and right, and they're rotating slightly. It might be hard to see the rotation, but they are rotating a little bit. So that's what this animation does. So we start with them being translated nowhere, in place, and then they end being back in the exact same spot, 0, 0, 0. Along the way, we are moving them left and right, different percentages, and rotating them with varying degrees. So again, I didn't write this from scratch. I found it online. There's a lot of different animations. If you go on CodePen, if you just type jiggle or shake, all sorts of things, there's a lot of very realistic animations. This one's pretty simple. So if I want to make our dice wobble using this animation, I need to select them in CSS, which I've already done. I'm just going to add on, and I'm going to do animation name is wobble. It needs to match whatever you called this. And then I need to give it a duration. So how long do I want it to take? For mine, I'm going to do 1 second. And if we take a look right now, if I refresh the page, you'll see that the wobble is actually working. Every time I reload, they do wobble. But that's not really the behavior we want. We don't want them to just shake at the beginning. This is the starting state. I want them to shake when I click. So what we can do instead is create a class that will make them wobble, and then selectively apply that class based off of whether we're currently rolling or not. The same piece of state that is controlling what text is showing up here and disabling the button, we can use that to control the class being applied. So this .state.rolling. So I'm going to come over here and move this into its own class. Instead of having it be on the die by default, I'm going to make a class called, I don't know, rolling, that works, and put this in here. Now we're going to selectively apply that class to our die, depending on a prop that is passed down. So back in my roll dice component, where I'm creating my individual die or dice, I'm going to pass a new prop called, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to call it rolling in my case, and set it to this.state.rolling, the same piece of the state we were using down here. We're setting it to true for 1 second and then turning it back to false. So same thing here. I'll just duplicate this little bit and paste it in. Okay, so now these components, our two dice, are going to have a prop that will be true or false, depending on if they're supposed to be currently rolling or not. So in the die.js over here, I can selectively use this.props.rolling to add that class right here. So I have class name. My class that I decided on is also called rolling, which maybe is a little confusing. So let's call it shaking, just to make it clear that the name means nothing compared to the name of the prop. So over here, inside of the class name, we already have this long string where we have one class, we have another class, we have a third class, and I'm going to add a fourth class optionally. So we need a space because when we're adding CSS classes, this is one class now. We need them to be separate, and we need it to still say FAS. So here, we're going to do the same thing. So here we're going to conditionally check based off of this.props.rolling, and if it is rolling, the class that we want to apply is called shaking. Is that what we called it? I already forgot. Yes, shaking. And otherwise, we'll just apply an empty string for now. It's not the most elegant thing. We can come back and fix it in a bit, but let's make sure that it does work. So when I refresh the page, they are not rolling. They're not shaking. But now when I click, they are. Once again. And if we open up our inspector and go to the React Dev Tools, and we take a look at these individual dice. So let's take a look at the first one. You'll see that rolling is false right now. I'll expand it a bit. And then as I click, keep your eye over here, you'll see rolling becomes true, and then it goes back to false. You can also look down here. So remember, these are props. So the props aren't actually changing. They're not being updated. Everything's being re-rendered. So the state is changing, which is causing these to be re-rendered. So I want to be really clear there. These props aren't being altered. The state is being changed. and it's re-rendering the die or the dice with those new values. So I'll close that down. And if we wanted to just clean this up a little bit, one other option is to do this.props.rolling and shaking. As we've seen a couple times, take advantage of that Boolean operator using the logical and to shortcut things. Okay, that is it for the dice rolling exercise. Next, we're going to continue with state. We're going to build some larger projects, and we're going to talk about some alternative syntax for set state and some common patterns for working with state. There's a lot to talk about with state.